Hey everyone, this is the first installment of the review of The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. I'm not going to cover this book from the first chapters all the way through, and in fact, the author didn't write the book as some type of progressive piece of work where you have to know the first couple of chapters to understand the concepts being made in the later chapters. In fact, this book was put together as a series of essays because Morgan Housel actually wrote a longer format essay, The Psychology of Money, and then he dug a bit further into it to create the book. So I'll go over the introduction, the key and important points that I think set the stage for the rest of the book, and then also chapter 7, which is freedom. So in the beginning of the book, he starts out with a very important example that I think underscores a primary emphasis with respect to the importance of money and how the importance of money is different to each and every single person, and it's based upon people's relationship with money. And so the example that he writes about is one of Donald Reed, a real person. Donald worked as a janitor for decades, didn't really have much in the way of income, lived very, very humbly, and didn't really have a lot of other financial responsibilities. And when he ended up dying at the age of 92, he ended up having over $8 million to his name, of which he had a significant philanthropic desire and left it to his local library, along with to some of his stepchildren as well. Well, how is it that Ronald Reed is able to acquire, by the time he dies, $8 million versus the other person that is used in the example, which is Richard Fuscone, who was a Wall Street hotshot who, in the great financial crisis, lost everything and went bankrupt simply because they had a lot of the idols of wealth, very, very large house in Greenwich, Connecticut, multiple properties, in fact. And so of the wealth that he attained, he ended up spending more and more of it. And then when the great financial crisis happened, all of those assets were effectively wiped out. And in fact, as far as I know right now, Richard Fuscone is still alive. He's in his probably early 70s at this point. So I want to just make a point with respect to generational differences between the two. So Richard Reed grew up and was born in the early 1920s. He lived the Great Depression. And like so many of that greatest generation, he learned the scarcity of money during that period of time. So without having any other knowledge of Ronald Reed, my hunch is, having encountered so many people that are part of that generation and their spending habits and how it is that they view money, it's not unlikely to think that he went through that experience a very changed person when it came to money, which probably led to his ability to be able to save money. Now, I'm not making any commentary as to whether you should or shouldn't be more like Ronald Reed, but it is impressive where he's able to live a very humble life, save a significant amount of money. I guess from my own personal standpoint, it was, hey, he may have wanted to enjoy that a little bit more than maybe he did, but something tells me that to a person like Ronald Reed, money is just something if you don't die. And so the importance of money to Ronald is just to have enough to be able to do the things that he wants to do and not really own any kind of idols of wealth. And that's what led to him being able to save money consistently for decades and be able to have a lot of money at the end of his life. Versus Richard Fuscone, who was a Wall Street hotshot, earned a tremendous amount of money. And in fact, I've encountered in my experience, in my career, plenty of people like that. And their view of money, it has a lot to do with power, has a lot to do with influence, and it has a lot to do with exclusivity versus Ronald Reed, where money is just there if you don't die tomorrow. And it's more of a scarcity mindset. And most likely that's been driven off of the experience of going through that Great Depression. It's also likely that Ronald Reed was a World War II veteran, served a country as well. So there's a lot of things that more likely than not went into Ronald's view of the importance of money to him and what money meant. It obviously did not resonate with him. He did not want power. He did not want influence. He did not want recognition. He just very, very quietly and consistently for his entire life saved every single thing that he had and ended up with a very sizable net worth at the end of his life. So We're talking about two different types of generations. Richard Fusconi is still alive, to the best of my knowledge, is in his early 70s. So he was born in the early 1950s, part of the baby boom generation, a very different perspective when it came to money. So from that perspective, it's understanding the importance of money. I think what the author has done in this introduction has really just put a juxtaposition of these two different types of personalities when it comes to money and the importance of money, and really illustrates the point that how you behave, your behavior is more important than what you know about money. So one of the quotes that Morgan has in this introduction is, how you behave is more important than what you know. I believe that to be true. Money itself, and he even discusses this, money is taught in a way of, there's facts, figures, laws, almost like physics. But money itself, yes, there's a certain aspect of mathematical correctness to it. But one of the interesting things he makes, points that he makes in the book too, is that, people have studied money, practiced money, along with the practice of medicine, physics, and in the sciences. There have been leaps and bounds as far as human knowledge and understanding of how the natural world works. And there has been outstanding leaps and bounds and quantum leaps with respect to healthcare, medicine, and being able to heal, common ailments that have extended the human life expectancy on planet Earth. Yet when it comes to money, it seems as if we've learned absolutely nothing. And I find that to be interesting, the comment that he makes, where so many brilliant minds choose to go into the financial profession, largely because of the draw of the amount of income and wealth that it can create. And that does have a certain kind of drain from other types of areas like medicine and science and physics. So not to say that that's necessarily right or wrong. The point that he's making in the book, however, is, have we learned anything? Have we been able to really kind of put together a series of concrete steps to help people along with respect to managing their money better? And the answer is no. And the reason for it is people behave differently with money, just like Ronald Read and Richard Fusconi. They behaved the polar opposite of one another when it came to money themselves. And it all has to do with how they view money, what money gives them. And so in that case, Richard Fusconi, money gave them title, prestige, community. It gave them a certain sense of power and a huge sense of self. So having a lot of those, more what I would call ostentatious items of wealth, large homes and very affluent neighborhoods, it made him a certain part of a community. And that's fine. He earned that. However, underneath the surface, he didn't have the financial backing to withstand a downturn like the Great Financial Crisis, and most of his wealth was tied to the success of the financial markets. And so he was a bit over his skis, to say the least, and it did cost him everything, and all of those idols were sold at auction at foreclosure. And from that perspective, he's had to build his life back again. Whereas Donald Read, the opposite end of the spectrum, didn't spend probably more than, he probably could have spent more than what he did. But in his mind, he just was, willing to do what he wanted to do, lived a quiet life, seemed to, relatively happy, as much as humans can be happy. And from that perspective, was happy to leave that wealth upon his passing to his stepchildren and to those areas in the community that he had the greatest affinity for. So, money is taught or not taught in certain ways. I think financial literacy with respect to being able to teach middle school, high school, even college age students on the importance of money and how to be able to do basic things like a tax return, how to do the basics of balancing a checkbook, the importance of saving early, the power of compounding. I think a lot of that is just absent when it comes to teaching younger people the values of money. And what we all end up kind of dealing with money, it's almost like the big talk, if you will, with your parents. It's sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. It could be awkward, fumbling, bumbling all over the place. So when we're talking about like sex with the next generation, I think there's that level of awkwardness when it comes to money too. And I think that there's a lot of stop and go, and the way money is taught is largely through example. And I would think, without knowing anything else besides the story in the book about Ronald Read, he probably learned a great deal about money as he grew up through the Great Depression and going through, the highs and lows with respect to the U.S. economy during that period of time. And like I said, I've seen that with that greatest generation. There's a propensity to save because in the back of the mind, and I've heard this from people in that generation, you just never know what can happen. And so always make sure that you're prepared to be able to weather that kind of storm. And they lived it. So I understand that. Whereas Richard Frascone, he did not live that. And was part of a generation that grew up through, the 60s, social revolution during that period of time, the baby boom generation, a lot, some of the monikers as far as the me generation came of age in the 1980s, a lot of excesses. So from that perspective, obviously wanted to enjoy that wealth, gain that power and influence, but at the end of the day was, like I said, a little bit irresponsible. He also includes a great quote from Voltaire where he says, "History never repeats itself. Man always does." So human nature, going back thousands of years, I'm sure there are plenty of examples, and I can think of a couple already, where you've got Roman emperors who are just over their skis with respect to their power, their influence, and their wealth, and it leads to their downfall and demise. This is the human condition living itself over and over and over again through the millennia. And it comes down to what money means to people. So that's, I think, a good segue into the chapter on freedom. So chapter 7 itself he starts it off with a great quote, which is, "Controlling your time is the highest dividend money pays." And I've said this for years, that true wealth equals discretionary time. And it doesn't matter the level of wealth that one has. It just matters whether they can control their time. So think about it. I think that's a reasonable concept. Most people, when surveyed, are miserable in their jobs. Why? There isn't a sense of control over what they do on a regular basis. They have a huge amount of tasks, a huge amount of productivity, huge amount of pressure with respect to getting those functions done that require all of their time. On top of that, the U.S. economy for decades now is a knowledge-based economy and not a labor-based economy. So maybe 60, 70 years ago, where manufacturing was a much larger component of the U.S. Economy, somebody working on a manufacturing line would be able to say, okay, I produced X amount of whatever it is over the course of the day. And okay, I did my job. I hit my quota, maybe I even expanded it. And they got to just put their tools down for the day, leave, go home, and not have to focus on what they were doing for work. And then came in the next morning, rinse, wash, repeat. But in a knowledge-based economy, most jobs require some type of mental consideration. Whether that's marketing, finance, healthcare, whatever it is, it requires a good deal of mental expenditure. And that never stops. It never ceases. And so the mind is always going with respect to being able to solve certain problems that are coming up across a day, and it eats into time. So that time gets lower and lower and lower. And so does that feeling of control. Okay, I don't feel as if I control my schedule. There are too many things on it, too many tasks to handle. I have to pick up hours over the course of the weekend. You kind of get the point. So from that perspective, it's, controlling one's life is more dependable predictor of happiness than what's in their bank account. And I've seen this firsthand. I've encountered plenty of people over the course of my career that I consider to be trapped by money. And especially during my time in New York, I found a lot of my colleagues that I worked with were trapped by money because they got to a point in life where they're raising family, they have a house, they have responsibilities, they've made certain choices with respect to money because of the position that they hold. And a lot of it on Wall Street was, okay, I've achieved this, this position, this title at this company. I've achieved a certain level of income. I need to demonstrate, my importance in the community based upon, others in that type of community. So I meant bigger houses and better neighborhoods. And with that came the burden of wealth. And that became a situation where they had to work. They had to hit these bonuses to be able to keep their lifestyle going. So once it became some type of forced issue for them, their level of satisfaction with their work went down. And I remember particularly one of my colleagues, his sister was a partner at one of New York City's largest, most prestigious law firms. And she did the exact opposite. She was very much like Ronald Reed. She lived very humbly, had a very humble house out in Long Island, made just ungodly sums of money because she was very, very good at what she did. And actually, the other partners of that firm were concerned about her. And the concern was that they didn't have enough control over her because she had enough money sitting aside where she could just walk away if she wanted to and not have to deal with the rigors of the caseload that typically a partner at that firm tends to have. So on Wall Street, there's a term for that kind of money. It's called fuck you money. And it's the money enough for somebody to be able to say, you know what, I'm done. I don't have to deal with other people's quotas, other issues. I can go off and find whatever it is that I want. And it's really what the author is talking about here. It's using money to gain time. And that's the most important aspect for retirees, because retirees moving into that retirement phase are trading all of that time that they spent doing what it is that they've done for decades. And that's changing into, okay, what time am I going to spend pursuing the things that I want to do? So as I reread this book, it really kind of just hits a lot of different light bulbs with respect to a lot of the things I see with people that I'm helping moving into retirement and people who have been in retirement going through the various stages of early retirement, mid-retirement, and later retirement, and the kinds of needs, kinds of things that they end up seeing. So I think the bottom line to freedom is having enough wealth to be able to have control of your day and time, and having a conscious plan to be able to set up more time for yourself. So even in that chapter, he notes that, if you have a couple of weeks worth of income saved, that if you get sick and you can't go to work, and let's say you're an hourly employee, you don't have to stress about that. And maybe you're, a knowledge-based worker and you've been able to set aside 6 or 12 months worth of living expenses. That's why it's so important to have an emergency fund, to give yourself the time separation to not have to just run into the next job if there's a downsizing or there's something that happens at work and that change needs to happen, which happens a lot. So building up enough of a nest egg to be able to give yourself the time to make choices puts you in a greater position of power and control over your own time. And that's the freedom that he's talking about here. It really drives around and kind of solidifies these kind of 5 F's that have been part of my life for a while now, which is faith, fitness, family, friends, and finances. And so faith, it could be religion, but it's more just a belief in something greater than yourself. Fitness is 2 parts. It's mental and physical, being able to be healthy enough, focus on your health span, your frame of mind, so then that way you're able to fully participate in the relationships with your friends and family. And all of those take time investments. Of those 5 F's, the one that can be delegated is finances. And that's what we're talking about here is, all right, if you want to take control of every aspect of your financial life, and you want to be able to, and that makes you feel better about being able to move your financial circumstances forward, all the better. But you are going to have to invest time to do that. That time investment is going to take away from friends, family, your personal fitness, and also the expression of your faith, just so long as you know that. And you can budget time appropriately to be able to make sure that you're covering all of those things. That's what freedom ends up becoming all about. And in this chapter as well, he shares a couple of really interesting statistics with respect to the attitudes that American workers have vis-a-vis other workers in other areas of the world. And so there were some studies that he quoted, and 45% of Americans surveyed in a particular study said that they felt stressed the prior day. Now that's compared to about 39% of the world at large. 55% of the same study said that they felt a lot of stress overall, and that compares to about 35% of the world. So it's no big secret. America has a work culture. It's you work to live in the United States. It's a go-go type of culture, along with a lot of other cultures in the developed Western world. So not surprising with respect to the numbers, but it does tell a tale with respect to kind of thoughts and attitudes when it comes to money. And it really just backs up to that question, what's important about money to you? Because I can guarantee you, Richard Friscone, the important thing about money is power, prestige, influence. And the importance of money to Ronald Reed was, if I need it, I need it, great. But if I don't, and I'm not going to spend it, and it's more important to me to save it, to know that I have something to lean back on if things get really bad, And from that perspective, he did, a good job with that. So in summary, I think this freedom aspect of money, time equals true wealth. I think that's going to be a common theme. You're going to see it throughout the rest of the book, but it's also something that I see in helping people transition and live well in those retirement years as well. So put some comments below. Welcome any types of questions, and we'll be back soon with the next chapter.